The 68 RFE. Whether you love it or hate it, it's something that needs to be addressed if you have a stock vehicle or have a few extra horse ponies. One thing that you guys really need to consider before getting started, whether your truck's bone stock or you do have some horsepower modifications done to your truck, you really do have to consider the shape of your transmission. Usually guys, and this is my personal opinion, if you're 150,000 miles or below, there's probably some parts on the transmission that you can get replaced that'll keep that thing nice and happy for a long time. For a lot of the folks that are over 150,000 miles, with my personal truck, I'm just going with a whole new unit to keep things nice and fresh. All too often I see in the industry, or at least when it comes to 68 RFEs, is there's a lot of misdiagnoses from specialists, dealerships, you name it. There's quite a few guys that'll just up and tell you, you need a new transmission. And I've had a couple guys who have replaced multiple transmissions on these trucks, but not tackling the actual problem, whether it's your wheel and tire size or something as simple as one of the small parts on this transmission that's really easy to fix. And guys have gone into entire transmissions. So today we're really going to talk about common issues with the 68 RFE and simple fixes that you could do in your driveway if you needed to. One of the simplest places to start on the 68 RFE is service intervals. Now the factory calls for 60,000 miles for heavy towing. I also kind of add on there high horsepower applications. If it's just a daily driver, they suggest 120,000 miles for your next transmission service. I personally would kind of throw that out the window. One of the big things I'm a huge fan of is premature serviceability. Not that you're wasting money on extra oils or anything like that, but it's really important to make sure that you keep this transmission happy and healthy. So starting off, getting serviceability taken care of. You can use your factory pan. It is quite messy, so expect your driveway to get covered in transmission fluid. And it's not the most friendly thing for serviceability in the future. Pretty much almost all of the transmission pans we offer on our webpage have a drain port and a sensor port on those. So if you ever want to service your transmission in the future, having that drain port keeps things nice and clean where it's coming out of a hole instead of out the side of your transmission pan. So it just keeps things nice and orderly. In addition with that, with servicing your transmission, we highly, highly recommend while you have the pan out of the truck and you're going to be putting a new filter in there, you really want to replace the factory plastic filter with one of these metal ones. Now, I have run into certain scenarios, or I've had this happen to me a couple times, where you go to torque this filter adapter onto your transmission and the direct torque spec from Mopar snaps the plastic one in half. We have run into a couple guys where they're losing pressures while they're on the road. When you drop the trans, come to find out, oh hey, the plastic one snapped in half or the pieces have gone somewhere in the transmission. So we are a huge fan of being able to slap one of these in there as soon as possible, as far as not having to worry about finding a plastic adapter anymore. Once it's in there, and you just have to replace the filters. So I'm the kind of guy where if I'm around somewhere where I can make an upgrade, I'll go ahead and do it. So I went ahead and went with these fleece transmission lines to convert over to an AN style fitting compared to the factory hardline. They do a really nice job with our hydraulic hoses here as well as our AN adapters. I also decided to go with a AN style sensor port here instead of having it in the transmission pan. I thought it was a little bit cleaner running it directly from the outlet of your transmission cooler, but it's totally up to you on how you're wanting to run it. This sensor port is sold separately and not included with the fleece kit, so you'll need to source that on your own. Running a deeper transmission pan, the BD transmission pan does run 4.5 quarts over factory. So if you're to fill up your transmission, it's going to be around 23 quarts of transmission fluid. But again, you always want to check your dipstick to make sure you're within the right limits. One of the big failure points of this transmission is going to be the valve body. There is a lot of cross leakage issues between the solenoid pack, so that's where the electrical connector goes in on the driver's side of the transmission to your actual valve body with all the different channels that pretty much command what gear you're going to be in, as well as the accumulator pistons. So those plates from factory are so thin And what effectively ends up happening with this transmission, because of the amount of slip that you can get from your clutch packs, is that this gets very, very hot. And what happens when this heats up is that separator plate that's between your solenoid pack and your valve body decides to warp and flex, and that's what causes cross leakage. Now, when you get cross leakage, you don't get solid shifts. Feels like your transmission's shuddering. It doesn't know what gear to be in. Conveniently, BD does offer a separator plate for you. One of the nice things about this separator plate that it does not require any major drilling or modification of the valve body in order to run this, like some of the other competitors. I usually recommend guys doing this where you have a basic tune on your truck. Even if you have some transmission tuning on your vehicle, you can run into some pretty hellacious cross leakage just because of the higher line pressures that you're running on your truck. Doesn't mean that it's not susceptible to cross leakage, and you can still get some poor quality shifts. So being able to get an upgraded separator plate will definitely help out with your shift quality and just overall life of the transmission. Along with their separator plate, they also include their accumulator piston plate. This is a lot thicker than the factory unit. One of the common things that ends up happening for a lot of guys who have upgraded trucks, when you go to downshift into third or fourth, what effectively ends up happening with how aggressive that event can be, you go to pass a semi-truck, all of a sudden you lose third or fourth gear on that downshift. Guys think, oh, my transmission's gone, I blew it up. But usually once you drop the transmission pan, you can see that your accumulator plate has bent in the shape of that piston, forcing itself out of the valve body. So BD has addressed this by giving you a very heavy-duty unit here. Again, this is a really easy job, something that can be done in your driveway. The Protect 68 kit, because you already have your transmission pan down, it's very much worth throwing these on the truck. It's something where for you guys that have low mileage trucks, can protect your transmission for a very, very long time. Does not require a full transmission build or anything like that. Can definitely help you in the long run. So some of you guys might be asking why you think you need to upgrade your valve body. You got transmission tuning or whatever you have on the truck. The big thing that you guys have to address with these valve bodies specifically is cross leakage. So being able to hold a little bit higher line pressure is crucial for you guys being able to increase the performance and the life expectancy of these transmissions. Now, what I mean by that, imagine my hands are the clutches in this transmission. So with not a whole lot of line pressure behind them, you can move your hands back and forth pretty easily, creating heat. Heat is something that really kills these transmissions and shortens the life expectancy. So we want to increase that line pressure by being able to seal things up a little bit more efficiently. So think, same deal, clutches, but you're putting a lot more force behind your hands there. It's not as easy to move your hands back and forth. And the same concept applies here in the transmission. The more clamping force you have with that upped line pressure, the less slippage and the more power you can put to these transmissions. There's a little bit of debate between folks as far as whether you should just run a transmission tune on your truck or whether you should run a physical device that's intercepting the signal on this to help increase your line pressures. Transmission tuners, they typically have their tune set up to complement their tuning that they're slapping on your truck there. I'm a personal fan of actually being able to use a physical piece of equipment in order to change up line pressures on these transmissions. Where typically with the 68 RFE, transmission tuners can bump up the line pressure to around 125 PSI. Not a bad thing. Not as much as you could potentially get out of it. It's just the physical limitation of your computer that can tell this transmission what to do. BD's line pressure enhancer here can shoot this all the way up to around 275, 280 PSI, which some of you guys might be thinking, well, that's way too much, I'm gonna break something. As long as you have your transmission supported for a higher amount of line pressure, which again, that all comes down to upgrading your valve body, then you shouldn't run into any issues. But again, increasing your line pressure is detrimental to the overall lifespan and performance of these transmissions. All right, so for you groovy cats running a 2013 to 2018 Cummins, whether you're running the 68 RFE or the Ison transmission, one thing that is a necessary upgrade, whether it's a factory truck, hauling heavy, or have a little bit of extra performance on there, we recommend getting a thermal bypass. Now, your factory unit, its thermocoupler has been known to fail anywhere from 8,000 miles all the way up to 300,000 miles. Now, having that variable in there costing you an entire transmission, because effectively what ends up happening, that thermocoupler shuts not allowing any transmission fluid to bypass, allowing it to get up to the cooler. It is designed in colder weather to help heat up the transmission so the fluid's able to flow a little more efficiently, but with it shutting and not allowing any transmission fluid to go to your cooler, it can fry these transmissions, costing you thousands of dollars. So a simple upgrade like this, it's just hanging out on your passenger side up front here with your inlets and outlets. Super simple, bolt in place upgrade for you there. But highly recommended whether you're stock or push and power. Now you don't have to go through a full transmission rebuild or anything like that, but addressing some of the known failure points on this transmission, one of them being the low reverse sprag here. It's a one-way style clutch. It is what first gear is using. So you got to think, if you're setting off from a light, whether you're putting your foot to the carpet or if you have a heavy load behind you, this is taking a substantial amount of abuse overcoming that initial tension leaving the line there. So one major thing we recommend is upgrading that. From factory, the cage that holds all these rollers and springs in place is made of plastic. Most of your aftermarket manufacturers go to a metal style cage. Now, with how hot these transmissions can get, especially if you're really getting on it or hauling heavy, the plastic just doesn't hold up over time. And first gear failure or not being able to go in reverse is pretty well known. So being able to upgrade to one of these units that is made of metal is very beneficial to you guys. One other well-known failure point of these transmissions is going to be your overdrive drum. Now, from factory, that unit is quite small and effectively ends up burning up pretty early on, especially for you guys who have a little bit more power on your trucks or you're hauling pretty heavy. Being able to get into an upgraded billet unit is extremely beneficial to you guys. They do help increase the overall clutch count in these, so they're able to hold up to a higher amount of torque. One last thing that I really want to hit on, now this is not going to be for everyone out there, but for you guys who are hauling extremely heavy or if you're running into some pretty steep gradients. Keeping transmission temperatures at bay is definitely a problem child for you guys. So one thing BD has done to help you guys out is getting you into a remote transmission cooler. Now, again, this is not absolutely necessary for everybody out there, but having one of these kits is extremely helpful as far as an addition to help keep your transmission temps nice and cool. One of the nice things with their kits, they do have a wiring harness where this is set up thermostatically, where it's going off of the actual transmission temp. So once it reaches a certain temperature, it'll cut on and cut off. So you don't have to worry about flicking a switch or anything. One last important thing to mention before we wrap things up here, for you guys running multi-disc torque converters, one, on top of that, you should be running a billet input shaft. These multi-disc converters can be quite abusive on your stock input shaft and have been known to cause failure. Other major upgrade that you really need to consider while the transmission is out of the truck is upgrading your flex plate. Now, your factory flex plate is known for cracking around the bolt connection at your crank there. So do yourself a favor while it's out of the truck and upgrade it to something that's a lot heavier duty. And if you plan on hauling or having performance upgrades on your truck, it'd be a great idea to have one of these in here. The BD one is SFI rated, so for some of you race guys out there, this is a fantastic option for you. It is up to specifications for 29.3. So any of you guys trying to run any of your classes, this is a great setup for you guys. One other major thing to consider, the SFI sticker on here, don't peel that off. There's a fun little laser etch under there letting you know that you just voided your warranty for this thing. So keep that sticker on there. You guys considering whether you need to go with a full transmission or just a rebuild. It's completely personal preference on you guys. Sometimes you don't have an option where it's pretty plain as day that you do need to get a full unit. I'd potentially talk to transmission builders to see if they can tear apart your transmission. Hey, you only need this certain amount of parts. Usually, and this is just my personal opinion, guys who are around 150,000 miles or above, I'd tell you get into a fresh unit, get a fresh transmission in there, or if you have someone who can do a full rebuild, go on that route. But for everyone under that, getting a transmission inspection will save you guys a whole lot of time and headache as far as getting your transmission back on the road and running. If you guys have any questions about the transmissions that we offer on our website or just any questions about your transmission in general, don't hesitate to give us a call or hit us up on the website at dieselpowerproducts.com.